Hey, it's TDA and welcome to this quick guide on logistic stations. I've seen a lot of people asking questions about logistic stations. How to set priority, how to get them to work, how to deal with power, how to make warpers go in and out properly, etc, etc. Stick with me for a few minutes, I'll tell you everything you need to know about logistic stations. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's start with the basics. In order to have anything go into your logistic station, you will need to set the item you want to go in as a item in your empty slot. If you put it to supply, it will automatically have drones go flying out, or either from the tower itself if you put actual drones in, or if you have somewhere else with drones requesting it, having set it to demand, it will actually request it from other sites. If you put it to storage, it will do exactly nothing. Nothing is taking out, nothing will be flying in. If you want to have stuff go out your logistic station, what you do is you either set it manually to go on the belt, or when you build the belt, you set it and you press tab to set it to the correct slot, and you build the belt and it will automatically come with the setting already attached. If we look at the other settings, the max charging power typically doesn't really matter. The base setting is good enough. If you really want power really fast in here, you can set it to high, but generally speaking, this is fine. The transport range, pretty much always you want to have this set at max. There's not really any reason in most cases to set it any lower. One thing you do want to change in nearly every station that you have is the minimum load of the drones. This will determine how much stuff your drones will actually be carrying before they fly off. Generally speaking, if you set it to the max, that will just make sure your drones are not flying with just one or two items, but the drones will wait until there's a full load and then they will start flying. This is not always something you want to do, and I'll cover that in a later section. Generally speaking, if you start out like this will work. One last setting, depending on what you're doing with the logistic station, consider setting this lower. If this is, like in my example, if this is just a production facility, having the output set to max is generally just fine. If you have input going into your station, you might want to set it lower. There's no reason to have 5,000 of a certain item being flown into a station if you're not actually consuming more than, let's say, maybe a few dozen per second. Now let's talk about priority, because I see a lot of questions about, hey, I have these two logistic stations. I have one over here that wants an item, and I have another one over here that wants the same item. Why is my stuff going just to one of those? Well, assuming you set them the same way, so I have these set with the same minimum load of drones, although basically these two are identical. If I now power up this thing, or at least have stuff going in, you will see, hey, look, it's actually the closest one that only gets the stuff. And as you can see, these drones are picking it up, they're flying back. This one is not doing anything. Why not? Well, that's because this simply is the closest one. The full demand of items is actually going to this one, and therefore this one is not getting anything. So how can you fix that? Well, pretty simple actually. It looks at the capacity of the drone. So given everything else being equal, the first logistic station that will be supplied is the one that is closest. Again, everything else being equal. Now if I put this one to a minimum load of, let's say, 90%, then this one will qualify for the next batch of stuff. And you can see, there you go. Just because these drones are satisfied earlier, so these only need a maximum load of 90% before they will start flying off, now suddenly this is the one getting priority. So have any priority issues between your two competing logistic stations for a certain item, this is how you fix it. However, of course, this still means you have a problem, because you can only supply one, not both, and there's not really any way to split it equally between the two. If you have enough supply, that is, if all these drones have flown off and there's still, in this case, copper left, the other ones will start flying as well. Now let's talk about power. As you can see, you don't actually need to power all your logistic stations. This one is not charged at all. It is still taking in copper ore. It is still receiving drones. The only thing it's not actually doing, it's not actually actively supplying anything. As you can see, there's drones in here, but there's no power, so the drones won't be able to take off. But the other drones will still be able to pick stuff up from this station. That means you can actually put down these little collector stations and have whatever station needs the actual content of this to come and pick it up. Of course, you can speed up the process by powering this up, making sure you have enough drones in here. But if you already have enough incoming drones to actually pick up all the supplies, it makes no sense to also power this one up. But it's an option you have. However, in terms of power, I see a lot of people struggling, because once you start plopping down all these little logistic stations, and especially if you use the larger ones, because those vessels use a lot of power, it is very easy to quickly start draining your power. What I really don't understand is why people suddenly forget that they have belts. There's nothing wrong with putting a simple belt, like this, into your logistic station that wants this. It doesn't cost you any energy. And of course, this doesn't work if your receiving logistic station is on the other side of the planet. Building a belt across the entire planet will lead to a mess fairly quickly. But if you organize your logistic stations in such a way that, let's say you're mining copper here, you're smelting it here, and then using it for circuit boards or whatever on the other one, you might as well belt. Of course, you can still use your drones in this case, because your drones can be used to supply the next part of your supply chain. So let's say you're making copper here, but you want to use it on the other side of your planet. Then you can have your drone start flying, but you don't need to have every single part of your logistics part. You don't need every single part of your logistics chain to actually go by drone. On top of this will save you so much power. I can't stress this enough. This will save you tons and tons and tons of power if you do it properly. Now remember how we had that problem where we wanted this copper ore not just to go to this one, but to go to this one as well? Well, belts also solve that problem. You can simply take it out, use the splitter, put in the belt. You don't even have to bother with any settings for the splitter. Do it like that. Do it like this. And again, this is basics that you learn in the early part of the game. But this way you are sure that not only this is getting copper ore, but this one is getting as well. Now you might be wondering why you would want to ever do this. Well, the answer is simple. If I'm making one type of material here, so in the case of copper, let's say I'm making, and let's assume this is actually copper bars, for example. Let's say I'm making magnetic coils over here, and I'm making circuit boards here. I don't just want circuit boards, and I don't just want magnetic coils. I want both. Well, of course, ideally, I have enough supply to cover both of them, but as we saw, in terms of priority, this can get messed up, and then you get either one or the other. By doing it like this, you can always make sure you're spreading it to both. Now let's talk about warpers. If you have these interstellar logistic stations and you're approaching the later part of the game, you might want to have warpers in here. Why? Because this allows your logistics vessels to travel in between the stars. Very cool. Very power hungry, by the way, so don't overdo it. But in general, this is very needed in the later parts of the game. Now, first of all, if you request warpers, don't go overboard like I did over here. You set it to something like maybe 200 or 300, of course, depending on how much you actually need. That will be more than enough to supply your logistics station. Now, you don't actually need to supply each of your logistic stations with warpers. If you take your belt, once again a belt, you have it set to warpers, you connect your other logistic station that you also want warpers into it. What you can see happening is over here, I haven't used any empty slots for the warpers, but it's still being supplied by warpers. And then finally, just to give you a little bit of an impression on how this works, as you can see, I have all the copper ore I need over here. It's being supplied to all kinds of different elements by the belts. It's actually going much faster than I can produce it. Still, a few drones are flying off to supply elsewhere where it's still needed a little bit more. But generally speaking, I have all the production going that I want. This means I have a very low power usage for these logistic stations. Of course, there are still drones flying around. I need to supply stuff. I don't have everything on hand on this site, but I have positioned everything pretty close together. So for example, I'm making copper bars here, I'm making iron bars here, I'm making circuit boards here. It's actually backed up because it's producing them faster than I'm using them, but you get the point. I have no drones flying over to this station because it has all the supply you will ever need And similarly, I have a few other things over here that are all being mass produced with only a minimal amount of drones flying around. Alright, that wraps up our quick tutorial on how to use logistic stations. I hope this was useful. If it was, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.